Live from Singapore. I'm joined by Senior Fellow at the Lowy Institute, Richard McGregor. Richard, thanks so much for your time. What do you make of the language you heard from President Biden and President Xi, for that matter? Are they being constructive?
Yes, I mean, Andrew actually makes a pretty interesting point about the contrast between the language we have in Australia and the language coming out of Mr. Biden's mouth. But I think what it tells you, and this has been on the cards for a couple of months, that China and the US have decided to stabilise the relationship for the moment, and they've been looking for points of agreement and looking for ways in which Mr. Biden can talk to Mr. Xi and to settle things down. Now, that does not mean that they're sort of headed for the sunny uplands long term. The same structural competition, contest, points of conflict are all still there. But the two sides have made a decision, and I've sort of been briefed on this as well, to try and stabilise things for the moment. And you can see it from the Chinese end. We've had a little bit less wolf warrior diplomacy recently. So that's what today's meeting is about.
The Taiwan question is the ultimate red line of China. That's what the Global Times said in the lead up as well. I know it's quite a very strong propaganda mouthpiece, the Global Times, but what did you think of that lead-in expectation management from Beijing?
Well, I certainly think that Xi Jinping will be talking to Mr. Biden about that during this call. The Global Times does hype things up, but in that case, what they're saying from the Chinese perspective is accurate. Taiwan is becoming much more a point of the contest station. In other words, the Chinese military is getting to the point where they would start actually thinking about some kind of conflict, not, I might say, an invasion or anything like that, but, you know, there's all manner of options available to the Chinese military. And so, you know, Taiwan is getting closer into the crosshairs of the US-China conflict. And so that's why, you know, Xi and the Global Times are talking about it.
And this meeting today, this virtual meeting, also comes off the back of two things. One, that deal done, surprise deal done on climate in Glasgow. The other, which hasn't got as much publicity in Australia, but arguably more important, and that was the further entrenching of Xi Jinping's power at the plenum in the last few days in the lead up to that Communist Party Congress next year. Basically laying the groundwork, wasn't it, Richard, for him to be president for life?
Yes, so this is one reason why China is now willing to sit down with the US, because they've got a lot of big domestic issues on their platter for the next 12 months. First of all was the party plenum, or that's a sort of a full meeting of the Central Committee of the party, which is laying the groundwork for a third term for Xi Jinping at the Party Congress next year. So they had the plenum, they've got the Beijing Winter Olympics next year, and then they've got the Party Congress as well. These are all very highly intense, highly sensitive, highly stage-managed events for China. So they're not looking for too much outside noise or conflict while they're going on. So as I say, the structural issues haven't gone away, but China has a reason to sort of step back a little bit at the moment and talk to the US.
Essentially, that internal Communist Party action, though, it elevates Xi Jinping or Xi Jinping thought to the level of Mao and Deng Xiaoping, doesn't it?
Yeah, so Xi has basically divided China's modern history into three eras, the Mao era, the Deng era, and the Xi era. So, you know, China stood up, China got rich, China got strong. That's how they define it. And so he's putting himself on the same pedestal amongst China's the pantheon of elite leaders. And that works in internal politics as well, because it makes him harder to criticize and harder to attack, because, you know, it's dangerous to be too critical of Xi Jinping at the moment, and particularly as he's going into a third term.
And just finally, Richard McGregor, as we look at this broader scenario, if we go back to where we began this meeting, the effort to try and dial down the tension here, is there a way forward of some commonality where they can work together, like on climate, that they can diffuse this successfully?
Up to a point, it's limited. I think the climate thing is very much a function also of John Kerry and the Chinese negotiator. They've known each other for a long time. They've worked together closely for a long time. They have a good relationship. So once they got the nod from the top in both systems to try and do something, they did it. Where else can they work? Maybe on pandemics, maybe on vaccines and the like, even though that's a bit of a contest between them as well. The areas of cooperation are limited, I think, and the big one really is climate change, if they're able to stick at that.
And is there potential as well that Xi dials down his own aggression, which has been, as we mentioned, with the wolf warrior diplomacy, it's been a feature, a hallmark of his leadership?
I think they know that doesn't work externally. It kind of works internally, but I think he doesn't, I think this is a time to sort of step back from that at the moment. It doesn't mean that China's ambitions change. They still want the South China Sea. They still want Taiwan. They still covered the islands in the East China Sea. They're still not going to be nice to Australia in any fashion at all. But it's just like a tactical sort of step back for the moment. I don't think we should overread it, but it's important nonetheless.
And is there any opening to restart our talks, having touched on that Australia angle?
I would not think so in any substantive fashion. I mean, you look at the language coming out of Canberra and the responses we get from China, these are not two sides that are willing to sort of quieten things down and sit down and have a chat. The initiative has got to come from the Chinese side because Australia has said we're willing to talk. And I doubt they would do it in the lead up to the election. And as Andrew Clennell said, I think it's pretty clear that the government wants to make China an issue in the election. So that's not the time for a sort of quiet restart of ministerial level talks.